Welcome to the Virtual Sangha podcast from virtualsangha.org. Looking to learn more about Buddhism and connect with friends on the path? Or maybe you're an experienced practitioner and you enjoy keeping a beginner's mind. Wherever you're at in your journey, you're invited to visit virtualsangha.org to browse our resources there and connect with our supportive and inclusive community on Discord. Find the link in the show notes for more information. And now, on with the show.
I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. Dhammam Saranam Gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Homage to the Blessed One, the Exalted One, the fully enlightened Lord Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa.
All right, thank you all again for joining me. Today we are going over our chapter in the Great Disciples of the Buddha that covers Mahakaccana. And I must confess that I have had a very challenging week and did not get much sleep in the past couple days. So I am very ill prepared to host today's event. So I will be hoping that some of our friends here will be brave enough to unmute their microphones and carry on the discussion in the latter portion of today's talk. So Mahakaccana is foremost in expounding upon the brief statements of the Buddha and explaining the Dharma, the real head scratchers, the challenging passages in ways that are very short, simple, direct, very plain language. He's not the disciple to go to if you want an inspiring poem. He's the one to go to if you want just a clear, concrete explanation of something in the Dharma. And at first, my impulse is that, oh, this is attractive, this is what I want to study Mahakaccana, and I want that kind of simple, straightforward kind of explanations. And something that I've reflected on since reading this chapter is the value of inspiration, and how when we get into just real, dry, concrete, straightforward descriptions of things, we can sometimes lose the spirit, lose the meaning, and lose the ability to think more broadly about how things should be applied. Maybe sometimes our inspiration from something poetic helps us to find a broader application of the Dharma, as opposed to just focusing on well-defined technicalities. Like, I was having a conversation with someone earlier in the week about clothing, and they wanted to wear clothing that made a political statement. And I was they were asking for feedback on it, and I was offering some reflections on right speech. And somebody else was of the opinion that the clothes that you wear is not verbal speech, so the rules about right speech don't apply to expressing yourself through wearing clothes. And so that was one of those things where I was thinking, like, okay, maybe that person is taking things too literally. Maybe I'm taking them too broadly, who knows? But um, as attractive as that kind of Mahakaccana, super straight to the point, dry, literal explanation can be, um, having the courage to actually think about something that is explained in a more inspiring and poetic way is also valuable. So Mahakaccana is known for sometimes the Buddha will say just one sentence, and Mahakaccana will be the one that the others go to for an explanation. And Kachana is always very humble in doing so. He says, like, well, the Buddha's alive. The Buddha's right here. Why don't you go ask the Buddha? And there may be various reasons why the people don't take their questions to the Buddha. Maybe it's, the Buddha sometimes would retire from the sangha, retire from teaching for the day. He would say, like, "Oh, my back is sore. I'm going to go lie down. Why don't you give the Dharma talk?" He said that to Shariputra sometimes. He's made similar comments to Mahakaccana. So there were times when the Buddha was not physically available 24/7 to be talking about the Dharma. But whenever Mahakaccana gave an explanation, people would later repeat Mahakaccana's explanations to the Buddha, and the Buddha would say, "Yep, that's exactly how I would have said it." So we get an appreciation for the value in having other teachers who can help us understand the Dharma, and having that teacher's insights confirmed by someone else. So I see with Mahakaccana a lot of the prototypes for what we do, like in the Dharma teacher order, or just Dharma teaching as a practice overall, is taking these inspiring utterances of the Buddha, explaining them, and confirming the insights and understandings more broadly throughout the community. So that's another inspiring aspect of the Mahakaccana story. There's a very interesting story in this chapter that I know we will have a lot to say about, the Soraya story. Before we get into that, though, because I saw that there was a lot of chat about that in the book club thread on Discord, I didn't see anybody talking about the Sona story. So I wanted to touch on that real quick. So um, let's see, where am I at in my notes here? Okay, so Mahakaccana is in Avanti, which is a region far away from the main centers of the early Buddhist community. And there is a lay follower named Sona who approached Mahakaccana and asked to be ordained as a monk. And Mahakaccana doesn't immediately grant ordination because he wants to make sure that Sona understands how difficult a lot of the challenges of being a monk will be. Um, so he recommended that Sona continued practicing the teachings as a householder and observed stricter practices at appropriate times. So that's also something that we continue to do today, is sometimes we'll take the 8 precepts instead of the 5 precepts, but that can be a separate topic. So Sona's desire for ordination increases over time. And again, he asked Mahakaccana, and it's not until Sona asks the third time that Mahakaccana finally accepts Sona as a novice. But there are a lot of practical problems. And this is the part that I found really, really interesting. So, under the regulations that were in effect at that time, it required 10 fully ordained monks in order to confer ordination on a new monk. So you had to have 10 monks present in order to ordain a new monk. And the Buddhist community in Avanti was so small and geographically restricted that Mahakaccana could not find enough monks. It took 3 years and considerable trouble and difficulty to assemble the required number of monks. After his ordination, Sona traveled to meet the Buddha, and Mahakaccana sent with him a message requesting some changes to the monastic rules to suit the social and geographical conditions in Avanti and other distant regions. And the Buddha actually agreed. So, in those regions, ordination could be performed by 5 monks rather than 10. Monks could wear thicker sandals because the ground was rough. They could bathe more frequently because bathing was important in the local culture. Other regulations involving bedding and the reception of robes were also changed to fit the conditions in which the monks actually lived. The purpose of monastic life was not discarded, and he was not told that ordination doesn't matter or that the rules don't matter, but neither were the existing rules treated like they were divine mandates. The rules were seen as something that could change with the place and circumstance. So the Buddha examined the conditions and changed the rules so that the practice could take root in a new region. There is some discussion that goes on every now and then today about lay teachers, the legitimacy of the idea of having priests in the Dharma, or even of having nuns be ordained. And some of the reasons why, especially things like nuns being ordained, is considered controversial is because of some events in history where the number of nuns was declining. And so it was just considered impossible to ordain new nuns. And there are some teachers today who are trying to increase the number of nuns and make that more accessible for women who want to become ordained. And some teachers are kind of making exceptions to the rules or finding ways to get nuns to travel so that you can have more nuns in one place, kind of like Mahakaccana had to do, where it took him years and a lot of difficulty to get enough monks in one place. So it's interesting that sometimes some people in some places cling to the rules as if they were written in stone by some divine mandate, where in the actual, scriptures, the Pali Canon, we see examples of the rules being adapted. And I hope that we have some adaptability. Hopefully, in our lifetimes, that would be really great. If not then maybe soon, that will make the Dharma more accessible in places where the monastic tradition doesn't really exist or is not very practical given the local culture, or the economics or the government situation or whatever, or gender should not be a barrier. And it's great that we have you know certain institutions that are doing everything they can to make the Dharma as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And hopefully we can see some more change to accommodate that. So that's my little soapbox on the Sona story. Now, the Soria story, that was one that got a lot of attention in the book club chat. And uh, the the Soria story, just to recap, is of a householder in a village who looks upon Mahakaccana and sees Mahakaccana's golden, radiant, beautiful appearance. And this villager, a man by the name of Soria, looks at that beautiful appearance of the venerable Mahakaccana and says, "That's wifey. I want that." Says, if I can't have Mahakaccana for a wife, I hope I can find a wife who is at least as beautiful. Okay, so we have a man looking at another man saying I want that for a wife. Now, there's so so much that we could unpack there about the perception of gender, about the perception of heterosexuality, homosexuality, the uh, the fact that there is no word used in the telling of this story for sexuality. Sometimes when we talk about homosexuality, heterosexuality in the context of the Dharma and the Vinaya, there's a word that people bring up that has kind of a tricky translation, is more related to a word for eunuch that pandaka is the word, and that word is not used in this story. So that's we could spend several uh, sessions talk going down this um, topic, but it's just treated like it's um, not something strange, that it is just a naturally arising thought. It's not stigmatized. It's not given a unique label. It's just a thought that happens, that Soraya has this thought about this monk, and it just happens, and there's no label for it, there's no stigma about it, but there's this transformation that transforms the way Soria sees themselves. And they are now, the narration now takes this turn where Soria is a woman. And part of the discussion in the book club, um, I'll read something that one of our friends shared. I will keep it anonymous since I did not ask permission previously to share it. But our friend in the book club chat said, I actually thought it had more to do with sexual attraction than with sexual identity, keeping in mind that this is from centuries ago and expressions of homosexuality may be portrayed as a change in gender because sexual attraction is not viewed as discrete from gender, and there was only binary. Um, this can be interpreted as Soria's change in sex primarily being about an upheaval in life due to lust. Likewise, the second change. So I'll pause and get to there. That continue the narration. So Soria goes away to another village, adopts a new identity, starts a new life and a new family, and even becomes a mother. And apparently, this transformation into a woman was so thorough that they had the female reproductive parts and were uh, gave birth to two children. So this story is very thorough in its demonstration that this is a literal, actual transformation that happened. But then eventually, an old friend comes to town, and Soria recognizes them, and they reconnect. And this friend eventually says, your whole life has been turned upside down because of this lust that you had for that monk. Why don't you go confess that? And so the lady Soria and their friend go to Mahakaccana, confess about these secret feelings that they had so long ago, and ask if Mahakaccana will pardon them. And Mahakaccana agrees and is like, yes, all is forgiven, no harm, no foul. And voila, Soria changes again back into a man. So that's the second change. And resuming the book club discussion, the second change can be seen as being due to eliminating lust. The text talks about it as an apology, but the way our friend here reads it in the Pali Canon is that apologies are not merely sorry and I will not do it again, but a deeper cleansing of the causes of thoughts that led to the misdeed in the first place. And then Soria goes on to attain arhatship. And that attainment of arhatship can be seen as evidence of uprooting the source of lust. And the final thing I'll read from our friend here is that it could be possible to tell the story from beginning to end by switching the genders. So begin with Soria as a woman lusting after a nun, and the same gender change can happen, and the same confession story arc can happen, and the same reverse gender change can happen, and the story would still work. It would still have the same points. And there was a reply there where one of our friends said that they highlighted the whole passage and kept asking, what does this actually mean? In the uh, BSI class, we have come across lots of challenging scriptures, and they can be challenging for a lot of ways. Either A, they're just difficult to understand, or B, they seem problematic, like they might have some roots in sexism or something like that, or maybe that they were written by a teacher who has later been revealed to be problematic. Maybe there was some abuse situation between them and their students. And so we have what may be good dharma teachings, but either because of the social context, the context of the author, or the way it's being presented, it's hard to understand. And some people say, well, we should throw that out. We should not include that with the curriculum. Or how can this possibly be? It's contradictory. How can somebody, what are we really going to start believing in these like miracle sex changes? And believe it or not, miracle sex changes do happen in other parts of the Dharma besides just this story. And again, we could, have a whole session just on the miraculous sex changes in the Dharma stories. But um that that decision to stay with a challenging scripture and to look for the meaning and the value in it and to say, what does this actually mean? That is a very, very brave and honorable choice. And it is something that I celebrate so much because it's so easy to just throw things out the window when we don't understand them or when we think that they might be offensive or outdated. So thank you to everybody who's continuing to participate in this book club. This book has been a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be, especially when it comes to terms of gender. I really was not expecting so much of that. I thought this was going to be some light work for us over the summer. So I'm very, very, very grateful for everybody who has stuck with us and gone through this book, and really excited to see what the next chapters are that are more specifically about women as the main characters and not just as background characters that we're trying to understand their roles to the main characters and stuff like that. So um, with that, I could keep going. The uh, book club chat channel was very active this time around, and I'm really grateful for that. But instead of just reading it all from top to bottom, I'm going to take a break here and pass the mic off to anybody else who might have some comments or reflections.
And here I was gonna wait. I was hoping somebody else has something to say, but I'll uh I'll include my observations. It was this chapter didn't have as much for me to write about, I don't think, because it was primarily focused on the teachings of Mahakaccana rather than his biographical information, which we have so little because he was so far away from the bulk of the Sangha. Um, I won't go into the book club channel stuff. I'll just leave it at I disagree. And that's because of my spiritual background. But we'll move on to the tying what we saw in this chapter into other texts that we may or may not have read. As you know, my background is more in the Mahayana and Vajrayana, so I see parallels between these, this older scripture and what we might find later. First, which a friend talked about. I have a note about this was the Madhupindika Sutta, which we call the Honeyball Discourse, whatever it was. This when it's elaborated on by Mahakaccana, this insistence that we not allow, what was the word? Is it papancha? Let's see. Yeah. This papancha thing, this mental proliferation, in that if we're not schooling our senses constantly, we are allowing ourselves to stray from the path, I guess you could say, which I guess is a bit, um, harsh, I suppose. But then again, if you've read, for example, like The Way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva is pretty harsh, right? He says that we need to constantly be aware of our feelings and our senses, right? And to keep them in check, because a single moment of anger can evaporate or extinguish 100,000 years of good deeds. And in the same way, also, also on this like mental proliferation note, this also made me think of the Lankavatara. I don't know how many of you have read the Lankavatara, but this sort of systematic deconstruction of the senses and viewing them as, I mean, they really are, they lead us into delusion and they attract us. Here in this sense, we're concerned, in this chapter, we're concerned about the senses giving us something to cling to, whereas in the Lankavatara, the implication is more that any of these senses are just delusion, right? You are living in a delusion. Your mind is creating this delusion. Therefore, the wise recognize it's a delusion and don't get attached to it. We can see the same sort of message between them, despite the fact that they are so separated in terms of geographical, or in terms of time, and also probably in sectarian beliefs, right? What else did I have? What other comments did I have? Mr. Golden Body Mahakaccana. I found the section about the exegetical method of Mahakaccana at the end interesting. I like this sort of thing where we talk about how a text might have been created, because I think not enough of that is perhaps done. Although to be fair, I haven't read a lot of the commentaries on the Polycanon, which is a huge gap in my understanding, and I'm trying to remediate that. Unfortunately, I need to start with something more basic, which is like the Udesas. This chapter actually got me into reading Udesas. I started scrolling through them on my iPad late at night, because I find this very interesting. This idea of expanding upon shorter phrases of the Buddha that require you to think about what he's trying to say, rather than having him just tell it to you. And I suppose this is another method. You could almost call it skillful means, I guess, of getting someone interested in the Dharma, rather than just explaining it to them. We all know, if we've taught anything to anybody, that the best way to teach is to get someone to do something rather than just telling them, especially to get them to teach it to somebody else. But back to the exegetical method thing. This, I believe this chapter was written by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Hopefully I'm not imagining that. And it's talk about the, I'm going to mess up the names here of our two texts at the end. The Pitakopadesa and the Netipakarana. Yeah. Bhikkhu Bodhi's admission that like Mahakaccana might not have actually written these, but he may have developed the exegetical method that's represented within them. And I appreciate this level of honesty, because I think it's a bit silly of us to assume that every single word on every single page of this canon was written by the person who said they wrote it. We know that can't necessarily be true, right? It's true for this, it's true for any spiritual tradition. There's a huge chunk of time where this was entirely oral, and the likelihood that they're recording exactly what the Buddha said unaltered, or what the Buddha or the chief disciple said unaltered for that many years, is not necessarily true. However, what is probably true, as indicated by Bhikkhu Bodhi here, that Mahakaccana developed this exegetical method, this method of analysis, and especially in his area of Avanti, which is it's a funny word. We have we use a product called Avanti at work, which is super prone to security issues. Anyway, and this method must have become so popular in this area that those who came after Mahakaccana, who we don't really have a whole lot of this, because we lack the biographical information, it's unclear what happened afterward, what happened after he was gone, after his parinibbana. We have to assume he achieved parinibbana. And it was so popular that people kept doing it, and then at some point, I'm sure somebody said, "Well, we are so far removed from Mahakaccana himself that we should probably write this down so we don't forget." And then also, it's a bit I don't want to call it esoteric. There's probably a better word for it, right? Maybe concrete, thick, difficult, and we improve upon it. And this seems to be something that happens routinely in the Dharma, that we have these difficult concepts and then we elaborate on them. We elaborate on them. They become really complicated. We simplify them. Then we elaborate on them. Interesting to me. Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the whole trying to understand where a text comes from at the end. But end of my comments here.
Thank you, Lemmy. There was something you said kind of towards the start of your reflections there about maybe something in the book club channel that you, I think you said, didn't agree with, or maybe I misheard you. If you'd like to explore that, if you have a different perspective on something that could be useful.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't want to go into it because I feel it may cause some hard feelings. In For my spiritual background, I see things like this, and to me, I still think it's viewed as a punishment. What happens to Soraya, right? Not like a punishment, like somebody's punishing Soraya, more like his actions incur karmic punishment. Because if we swap the sexes, right? If Soraya is a woman at the beginning and becomes a man, uh, I know as a male, I will not be taken as a wife and made to bear children. That will not happen to me. But as a woman at this time, that may happen to you. And several times, well, I shouldn't say several times, at least another occasion in this very chapter, we see that happening to a woman. The the lady who gave up her hair around Mahakaccana's ordination. And to me, it's perfectly acceptable for me to look at this and say, this is based upon their beliefs at the time, right? They viewed this as a lesser state, and it doesn't end here. It continues even later, and my mind is drawn to some of the scriptures attributed to Yeshe um, with Padmasambhava. Uh, Sort of even the woman saying that, oh, I'm a lowly woman, I'm a weaker spiritual vessel, I need your teaching, yada yada yada. This idea, I think it's fine to see that they believed this. They believed that being a woman was a lesser state, and then just to move on, right? I mean, these men aren't gods. They don't have the Buddha has the unaltered truth. He sees the Dharma, but just because they say these things doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with them, right? We can derive this symbolic meaning, and that's good, right? And I appreciate there being other people around to derive that symbolic meaning. For me, I look at it as somebody. I don't like to do this thing where we assume that those who wrote it viewed it symbolically. They may have, but I've encountered so many circumstances, especially in other spiritual traditions, where it isn't viewed symbolically. This this is supposed to be empirical fact, what they've written down. And by assuming that it is, I don't necessarily think I'm representing them correctly. So I see something like this happen, thinking, oh, this is just a punishment. Someone's being punished for their negative karma, their negative actions. And then when they cleanse this obscuration, to use a bit of Vajrayana terminology, the punishment is alleviated, right? Like we have an obstacle, and we chant the 100 syllable mantra enough times, and that obstacle is cleared, right? Same deal.
Yeah, thank you. So, in a nutshell, a super concise nutshell is that some of us in the book club channel were looking for symbolic meanings and uh, it's possible that we might be looking too far, and we may be disregarding the extent to which the authors meant this to just be a literal representation of the karmic relationship between genders, and that being a male is a desired state and being female, especially in the case of this kind of magical transformation, was an undesired state that was a result of some impurity or uh, obstruction or obscuration. And I very much appreciate the sensitivity with which, we're addressing this and talking about it. And I am very grateful that we are in good company of friends who are able to have these difficult kind of conversations without it just becoming, people attacking each other or anything. We've had similar conversations in the BSI class, and some of it's been really challenging. And I think that it's really, really good for us to have these conversations and acknowledge that not all of this is just something symbolic. It sometimes is just as bad as it looks. And I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Pam, who was she was studying the Dharma, but the BSI class exposed her to parts of the Dharma that had not come up for her before. And when she discovered how much sexism there was in the Dharma, in the, I don't even know if you would call it the Dharma, but the teachings related to the Dharma or associated with the Dharma or sometimes bundled in with the Dharma or attached to the Dharma, however you would distinguish the discriminating from the non-discriminating, it was like a slap in the face. It was a big shock. And I think part of the reason why people get shocked to find out that there is sexism in teachings that are called Dharma is because it sometimes gets swept under the rug, never talked about, or if it is talked about, we look for symbolic meaning in it. And I think that it might be a mistake to say that it's either completely one or the other, that it's either symbolic or it's concrete and literal. Because even if somebody is trying to be concrete and literal, and anytime they're communicating something, they're using signs and symbols and inferred meanings to make that communication effective. So it's always going to be a blend. And sometimes it looks like there are multiple authors who are competing with each other to get a message preserved in the Dharma. And sometimes the compromise is to contain two conflicting messages. So, for example, in one of the chapters that we had read in the previous weeks, they were talking about nuns and the ordination of nuns. And one argument was women are just as capable of becoming enlightened as anybody else. And on the other hand, some commentary was being shoehorned in there that um, the ordination of women is going to cause a lot of challenges and difficulties for the community. So it was like two different perspectives, but it was all coming together in the same sutta. So sometimes the message is itself contradicting, and that may be a reflection of how many people have been involved throughout history of recording, commenting, translating, commenting on the translations, and expounding and sharing the Dharma. So it can definitely get complicated. The Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra is another one of those that has a magical gender transformation story. And in that one, it is there's a goddess who transforms Shariputra into a woman, and Shariputra is shocked to be a woman, and the goddess challenges Shariputra to discover the essence of gender. can you show me where does masculinity or femininity come from? And Shariputra says it can't. You can't find the dharma of gender. All dharmas are beyond gender. The dharma is neither male nor female. And so there's that can be read as this really um, open-minded, non-binary perception of the dharma and the potential of people who are following the dharma. But then again, there's still more commentary in that same Vimalakirti Sutra about being the male state being a more desirable state. And so it is complicated. But the very last thing that I'll say on the subject is that we're not just talking about ancient history and outdated views of gender, because a lot of this stuff still happens today. And I'll share a tiny little anecdote from the temple. And what I'm sharing on my screen right now is the view of the meditation hall at the temple. So I was literally standing about just a few feet to the right off screen of what's shown here when I heard this exchange that I'm about to tell you. So we have a nun, Sister Faplan, who does a whole lot of work for us and for the uh, BSI class and for the Buddhist correspondence course for prisoners. And, that woman is a saint. She's the closest thing to Mother Teresa I've ever met in my life. And she's amazing. And she's, uh, when you put a robe on her and shave her hair, she is to me the icon of a nun, and she's like the archetype of my spiritual big sister. But um sometimes, especially the Vietnamese folks who come to visit the temple, they accidentally misgender her, and they will refer to her as a man. And so she's Sister Faplan, and the joke is that sometimes she is called Mr. Faplan. And there was a Vietnamese lady there who noticed that she was being misgendered, and Sister Faplan, who is a Caucasian American who does not really speak Vietnamese, didn't even realize that she was being misgendered because she didn't speak Vietnamese. So Vietnamese people were greeting her with masculine terms, and she didn't even know. She just saw they were smiling and bowing, and she returned the smile and the bow, and that's it. So when her Vietnamese friend said, "Oh, they were calling you Mister," um, Faplan didn't really care. It was just like, okay, whatever. But the Vietnamese lady, the friend, was like, "That's a good thing," and she she said kind of jokingly, "Maybe that means you'll be reborn as a man in the next life. Congratulations." And Sister Faplan was like, "I don't need to be reborn as a man in the next life. Like, it's Um, but this Vietnamese lady was explaining the reasons why being reborn as a man in the next life is seen as a beneficial thing. And a lot of what she was saying was coming from her lived experience, her cultural perspective of, you know, to quote James Brown, this is a man's world. And so here you have this Vietnamese old lady who, if she hears a teaching that says being reborn as a man is preferable, where you and I might be shocked by that, she just shrugs and says, "Yeah, that's the way of the world." So there's a lot that goes into how these topics are perceived and our reactions to them, and I am just very, very grateful that we're able to have a honest and constructive exploration of this together. So thank you very much. So I will wrap up now. I'll give a pause for a few mindful breaths, and if anybody has anything they'd like to share, feel free to unmute yourselves. Otherwise, after a few mindful breaths, I will go ahead and share the merit. Sharing the merit. Reciting the sutras, practicing the way of awareness gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path. I bow to the Buddha. I bow to the Sangha. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. That concludes today's book club. Next week, I believe Ted will be sharing his liturgical service, and our book club will resume the week after that. So, Sunday, August 2nd already. Thank you all for joining me. Have a nice week. Thank you.